Hey, it's Jason with a special episode here today. We're talking with Christopher Still of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And in addition to playing trumpet in the LA Phil, Chris runs honestypill.com, which is a coaching service for anybody, but of course he works with a lot of musicians, and he just launched his podcast. It's divided into seasons. We're talking about that. His first episode actually features Trevor Jones, who works with me here on the podcast. And here's a bit about why Chris started the Honesty Pill podcast. When does the first of the season come out?
So the episode I just put up is, the little 5-minute intro, which I'm going to leave up there because it sort of sets the tone to the season. And the first interview will be put up Monday or Tuesday. And actually, a good friend, Trevor Jones, someone you know very well, is my first interview. So I took advantage of his articulate way of presenting things to kick off the season. So very excited about it.
That's awesome. And I love this gear you got. Is that an SM7B in front of you? What are you talking into? I'm just curious.
It is indeed the classic, right? What else? SM7B. And I just got a Zoom board, like a mixing board that has the ability to route a Skype call into the board so I can deal with the levels and what is it called? Mix minus, so they're not hearing the reverb. So I think this is going to be a great tool for the moving forward. Since we're not doing anything in person, I had to figure out a way to make this work in studio. So I think this is going to be a good solution for it.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's great. That Rode has something similar called like the Procaster or something like that. And I know that Zoom just came out with something. I'm just rocking the Zoom H6 that was perfect for my live podcasting days. And I've got the more ghetto version of your mic. I just got the good old rock and roll SM58. I've been thinking about upgrading, but I've got so many. My microphone quality is probably not what's holding me back in life. So I feel like I have to step up a couple levels before I reward myself.
You have to remember you're talking to a trumpet player. So our DNA is when there's a problem, just throw gear at it and it'll go away, right? I like gadgets and things, so I decided to upgrade to this mic. I gave my wife Amanda my old mic, which is a pretty good mic too, because she's doing a lot of online coaching these days too. So I figured if I had to buy another one, I might as well go ahead and get this. So.
Yeah, it's a perfect for home. I was going the route of doing everything in person, and so just throwing a few SM58s in my bag, and it doesn't matter if it gets run over, was a good route. So, but since I'm apparently at this desk for the foreseeable future, I might get something. So, and my podcast is totally informal. I guess maybe we've started at this point. I'm not sure, or maybe but why actually Honesty Pill? When did you start this?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and I can kind of give you the background for it. Was that I started my coaching, teaching career, whatever you want to call it, just coaching people through excerpts for preparation for auditions. And what I found was people were either flying in or coming into LA to get coachings, and we would get halfway into the lesson, and we would almost every time discover some sort of major issue that would probably keep them from even having advanced out of the first round. That's not to say that everyone I work with had that, but I'd say 80% of musicians that I've worked with, there is something that's standing in the way of them being successful in auditions, and that's partially why they come to me. And what I realized was that everyone is making the same types of mistakes over and over again, and most of it is something that can be fixed with a little bit of awareness if it were just pointed out. Then you could work on that at home or with your teacher or with your practice buddy or whatever, and then come in for the coaching. And then we can take that information and really get some traction. The other funny thing is most of the people that I was working with would come in for coaching, and I'd say, great, well, you're in pretty good shape. There's some things we need to fix. When's the audition? And the answer was always, oh, it's next Tuesday. And there's not a lot of real traction we can get in a few days. So I decided to find a way to put this information in some sort of an online format. I created my first course. And the idea is just to deliver the basics sort of on your own or even through a group coaching program, and then we can tweak it. That's all in the audition world. I've moved on to some other things too, but that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, I figured audition was the way it started. We could have used an honesty pill last night in a conversation I was on with 3 other Bay Area freelancers, and it got very dark very quick. All 3 of which are thinking maybe I should leave music because I have no idea what's coming back, but I've only played my instrument. That's all I've done my entire adult life. So you and I have been inadvertently preparing for a pandemic is my line these days, with building out some other projects. So you're in a different boat, but man, it's, and so why a podcast? I'm a huge fan. I've been listening since 2005 with my iPod video. And so I've just been digging it. Have you been a regular consumer of podcasts for a while?
Totally. I'm a multitasker at heart, and so ever since podcasts were a thing, I'm like, oh, I can do like a training session about something while I'm walking my dog around the lake or something. So podcasts have always been. I'm more of an oral learner anyway, and it comes down to writing or talking. I'd love to talk before write a blog any day of the week. So podcast was sort of a natural outgrowth of what I already like to do. Plus, when I have another launch of another program or a product coming up, I'm not going to say I've exhausted all the tools that I have, because I certainly haven't, but it's nice to have some variety of getting the bat signal out there other than just social media or email lists or sequences and things. And I find that I think my message is a little clearer on a podcast than it can be in some of my blog and some of my writing. So I just figured I'd fiddle around with it and have some fun with it.
Yeah, well, it's been fun for me. I'm coming up on 1,000 of these. And it's fun to go from my very first one in 2007, where the question was always, who are you? What's a podcast? And why should I be on it? So we're in a different point here, but it's I like you, walking the dog, doing the dishes, taking a run, all that kind of good stuff. That's the way that I like to learn too. What are some of your go-to podcasts, either in the music space or outside? I'd love to know.
Well, at the moment, I'm consuming a lot of podcasts about podcasts because I'm trying to learn what mistakes can I not step in. There's one called Podcraft out there that just had a whole episode about the 10 commandments and things you don't want to screw up. And, it's just like anything, whether you're learning an instrument or online business development or audition strategy, you don't know what you don't know till you know it. And some of these mistakes that can be avoided and should be avoided are just sitting right there if you get the guidance and the help. And that's kind of the beautiful thing is there is a podcast about anything that you can possibly think of. And if you're willing to dig through and find one that resonates with you, they can be a great way to connect with content. I mean, I don't know if a podcast about audition strategy would have a very long following or multi-seasons, but there's a lot of things about audition strategy, for example, that I could tell you in a format of like a modular, this week we're going to talk about this week we're going to talk about this, and you can get a lot out of that, and then you can come in for actual work. So a podcast is just like no different than subscribing to a blog or following a YouTube channel, I think.
And you're doing seasons with your podcast, right? And so what's this first, you and I were chatting about this earlier, but the idea of seasons came way too late for me to even consider it, because season 1 would be like 700 episodes and then season 2. But how many episodes are you conceiving of for this season? What have you got in store for that?
So I have my next launch of a program that I run called the Online Business Accelerator, which basically, similar to the Audition Accelerator, takes 10 years of experience and distills it down into a 4 or 6 month program. So that launch is happening in January. So I figured a great way to ramp up and just let people know what I'm about, where I stand, what I stand for, what I stand against, would be to do a season of podcast that is focusing on musician entrepreneurs realizing that if you are the type of person that has the wherewithal to spend 10,000 hours in a practice room, that you're probably capable of doing a lot more in other areas of your life as well. And if you think about it, we tell kids to learn the violin or learn the piano because why? Because they're all going to become professional musicians and tour the world? No, it's because you are learning great life skills, discipline, organization, goal setting, working with other people, pride, joy, all the things that come from that amazing experience of presenting your work through an instrument. I've seen kids experience this with coding also. Apparently, for brain development, learning how to code is similar to playing the piano. At least that's what I've been told. I don't know as much about coding, so my kids are not getting that benefit, but learning an instrument is an amazing thing. But what I found in my experience is musicians who become successful only do one small, narrow percentage of what they're capable of. They become a really good employee of an orchestra. They become a tenured member of a college, and they never do more than just that one narrow thing. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, by the way, because if that's your if that's what gets you out of bed in the morning, you should do that. But sometimes you lose control of that career. For example, the pandemic shut down the careers of people who only know how to play or only know how to teach in person. And if your life operates with limiting assumptions that that's all I know, but you're out of luck right now. And also what's even more tragic is you're not serving that audience that's dying for you to be in their lives right now. So my whole position for this first season of the podcast is you are capable of doing more than just play. You're capable of more than just teaching. There are so many opportunities available to musicians, but they just don't know it because they haven't been taught to. And frankly, why would they? What's your number one job at conservatory? Is to master playing your instrument. That's your number one job. That's what you focus on in lessons. That's what you focus on in your ensembles. You're not getting trained how to become an advocate for your art or how to create a chamber series or even how to talk to somebody about how to listen to music. Those are skills that are required to be a successful artist these days. And I'm hoping that I can highlight that by interviewing musicians who are out there actually creating new things and killing it. And, some of them are making six figures and above solely in these new endeavors.
Yeah, it's tough. The training, we're from the same general age range. I think back to, I went to Northwestern, double bass performance, masters in double bass. I've done, but you've risen to higher places in the industry, certainly in terms of performance than I have, but we've kind of lived in that same classical music world. What I notice, if we're just thinking about that world, and I don't know if it's the obsession with perfection and trying to get all these little things polished to perfection, but there's just a general fear that I sense among people who spend most of their time performing or teaching classical music of just putting yourself out there and even a lack, I don't want to sound mean, but like a lack of imagination, like what do I do? Teach them, play or teach are really there, but there's so much. My mind was blown the first time I went to the NAMM show and I realized, oh my goodness, I'm here with 100,000 people, and 0.1% of this show, maybe, or somewhere around that relates to what I do, or what I have done professionally. And then I was talking to the president of a company I work with, and he said, yeah, but that NAMM show, that the music industry is like not even the sales of Black Friday typically. So it was just sort of blowing my mind with the size of the world. And I think we classical musicians, or those of us trained in it, we get so myopic in what we see. It's like we don't even know where to start. So I think the overwhelm is a huge problem. I'm sure you've seen that with people that you've worked with.
It's not only the narrow vision too, it's also the place and time. I feel like musicians are so beyond the time or behind the times as far as how we present things. I mean, even if you think of in terms of the shudder and rocking of reality that this whole pandemic has created, because why? Because suddenly musicians needed to find a way to do their work online. Here's a newsflash. People have been working online and very effectively for a very long time. The fact that musicians have never created that space is just sort of indicative of how we don't apply our amazing creative powers to anything other than playing. Why shouldn't we be doing this stuff online? Why shouldn't we be creating experiences that are valuable and can reach and have accessibility to people who couldn't have it before, simply because we haven't bothered how to figure it out? I mean, if you look at orchestra models, I hate to say this, and I'm proud of my own orchestra because I think we're thought leaders in this space, but driving an hour and then going into a very small seat and sitting perfectly still for an hour or two, not applauding when you want to because there are these rules in place, and then you have to rush to the bathroom. It's a very archaic, outdated way to consume art. There's so many more things we could be doing that would be not only like impactful for our audience, but fun for us as artists. Here's I can kind of jump into this a little bit.
Please.
Kind of how I walk people through this process. I kind of have this, like, play on this idea of having a superpower. Everybody has a superpower. If I were at a party, and talking to a bunch of people, and I said, I really need help with is this thing right here, somebody's going to say, oh, go talk to Jason. He is the guy. He is the expert. I don't know anybody who has a handle on that better than him. We all have one of those. Some of us have multiple superpowers. So I like to get people to identify, what is that for you? Does that mean that you're really good at audition coaching, or teaching a specific method book, or showing high school kids how to play string quartets and understanding chamber music. What's your superpower? So once you identify that, then you have to go to like the second sort of GPS coordinate and say, what do you stand for? What do you stand against in this? What's your point of view? Why do you think this thing is so important that it should exist in the world? So I'll use myself as an example. When I first started Honesty Pill, my superpower, I think, was that I have failed at a lot of auditions, like a lot. I also won a couple, and I've listened to hundreds of auditions on every single instrument from behind the curtain at the LA Phil. So my superpower is I have a pretty good vision of what it takes to prepare for and execute a winning audition. And I also know what 80% of the people out there are doing. So that's my superpower. What do I stand for? What do I stand against? Okay. I stand for demystifying what is going on behind that curtain, that you think that audition panels are waiting to knock you out, or they're counting your wrong notes, or that they can't wait to dismiss you, when in reality, committees are dying for you to play great. They're hoping that you are the one. So that's what I stand for. What I stand against is getting $40, $50, $60,000 in debt going to school, graduating from there with a master's degree in performance, and having no idea how to win an audition. I stand against that. And I stand against it because that's exactly what happened to me, and I had to figure it out on my own. So you got the first two. What's your superpower? What do you stand for? What do you stand against? The third question you want to ask is, does anybody care? Is there an audience for your thing? Like, is it something that people are asking for? Because if it's not, that might not be a great idea for you to become, the biggest advocate for, or to create a business. But if there's an audience there, and so again, for my example with the Audition Accelerator, yeah, everybody who graduates from conservatory probably would benefit from at least one or two things that I might have to say. And then the fourth question is, and this is what's so fun to listen to since this pandemic, is this scalable? Is this thing that you have, and this point of view that you have, and this belief that this thing should exist, is it something you can bring to more than one person at a time? And that model, and this goes back to our topic of orchestral musicians being sort of outdated, is we need to move on beyond this model of trading dollars for hours if we're ever going to have any real impact. So I walk people through that sort of GPS setting of those four things. And if we check all those boxes, then we have something we can say, look, this is something you can take and create something new. And whether it's a business or a nonprofit or just a way of serving your current audience or a bigger one, that actually fires you up and gets you excited and connects you back to why you're doing it. That's what the first season of the podcast is going to focus on. And I'm so excited for people to hear the conversations, because there's some good stuff coming up.
Nice. I can't wait. I'm subscribed and will be following along. And it's really interesting. You were on a trumpet podcast. I'm forgetting the name right now, near the beginning of the pandemic, which I was listening to. And you were chatting about, and feel free to fact check me if I'm getting this wrong, but you were talking about like chatting with some colleagues right before the pandemic. What do the next 4 or 5 years like in terms of development? And I remember sitting here in San Francisco with Rob Knopper of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, audition hacker, and I think percussion hacker he has too. And we were just walking around the city. He was in town, and we just started talking about online teaching. And I was just curious of his thoughts. And he said, Jason, this thing is going to ramp up like you wouldn't believe. This, just in terms of scale. He was just describing what he built. And I thought, wow, you're and now 4 years later, watching everybody try to figure something out. I still think we're on the early stages of tapping into these scalable tools, especially those of us that have been steeped in the classical music world and haven't experimented a lot. But it's what do you see for? I've been having a lot of conversations since the pandemic started about what do you see for the future. Obviously, some of them are bleak, but in terms of maybe like the sort of programs you're talking about and things that do scale, like if you could look into that crystal ball and see a few years ahead, what do you think might be coming?
Yeah. So look, there's a lot of really negative stuff happening in our industry right now, right? I'm a walking billboard of that. You can get to a very high level and still have no control over your income, no control over who you're working with, no control over your performances. And, the silver lining is a lot of the boundaries that existed what is it, 7 months? Are we in the 7th month of this
I
thing?
think so. Yeah.
A lot of those boundaries that existed are just completely wiped clean now. Obviously, there's still a big digital divide in underserved communities, which is a big, huge beef for me that I'm trying to figure out how we can all use our superpowers to reach people who don't have access. But that's another podcast. The thing is, a lot of those boundaries that have been stripped, when we go back to normal, whatever that means, a lot of people are going to go back to the old way of doing things because it's what they're comfortable with, it's what they know, and it's easier for them. But there's going to be a larger audience of people who had some sort of experience during this pandemic, some connection with a teacher or a concert or some resource that they didn't know about or maybe would never have been connected with. They're going to stand in that space and say, I would like more of this, please. And the people who are willing to stay and serve them, I think, are going to have an amazing time expanding their careers and their businesses. Look, we're still in a very white space as far as what we're doing right now, especially musicians. And musicians are generally not great at being advocates for themselves. Some of them put up a website, some of them have a YouTube channel, but a lot of the time I found when people get up to speak to an audience in front of an orchestra or speak to a donor luncheon or something, they feel like they should pat themselves on the back that they were able to string 3 or 4 sentences together, when in fact that is the area we're all going to be moving into, becoming more, like I said earlier, advocates for what we do and showing people that this isn't like classical music. It's just music, and it's for you and it's for everyone else with a pulse. And I can help you figure that out and I can help you understand it. Hey, look, if you want to learn more about the background and the reason this composer did this or that, that's icing on the cake. But what I want to get people to understand is this is for everyone, and we have to be inclusive and bring those people in. And the way that's going to take shape in the online space is through people taking their normal lessons that they've been doing or their normal concerts and morphing it into something bigger and better.
Mm-hmm. I was having a actually quite uplifting conversation yesterday with the bass teacher at Ithaca College, Nicholas Walker, very imaginative person, and he came back from, he was on sabbatical last year, came back right into the middle of completely online teaching, and he has created this asynchronous teaching model that is just absolutely beautiful. And he was so adamant. He's like, when we return to in-person lessons, this model is going to stay because it's better. And I'll put it on the podcast in the next few weeks, but it's all about like recording practice sessions, doing a performance recording, all these sort of ways that he's using the technology we have creatively. And I'm seeing so many people coming up with programs that are scale incredibly well. And something Nicholas and I were talking about, and it sounds like you probably are thinking along the same. Oh, I'd love your thoughts on it. Actually, is just that one of those other things that is just been baked into those of us trained in classical music is like the 1 hour lesson once a week. That's how you learn. And a colleague of mine, David Cutler at the University of South Carolina, wrote The Savvy Musician. He's been trumpeting a different horn for years and showing all these different ways that you can connect with people. What are your thoughts on the one-on-one, once a week teaching model? And I know that you've got other thoughts, because that is what doesn't scale, right? It's similar to a gig. You only have so many hours in the week.
Right. I think the question isn't really about whether or not a one-on-one 60-minute lesson is valuable, because there's nothing better than being in the room with someone else. When you teach online, you're missing out on a lot of cues that are readily available when you're in the same room with someone. And by the way, those are things that you can evolve your teaching. You can learn how to work with those things. So I don't think the question is it that devaluing that model of teaching? And I don't think it is. But here's the context. Good teaching, good coaching is about transformation. It's not about information. If it was about information, then everyone would have a top 20 checklist and they would have lost the weight. They would have, learned the language. They would have done those things and had the results and moved on. It's like in the, what is it? The microchip that they put in the brain in I'm forgetting the name of the movie right now, but it's like, oh, now I know Kung Fu. If it was,
yeah, like the Matrix or something like that.
What I would offer playfully for consideration is, why don't we keep doing those one-on-one lessons, but why don't we make it part of something bigger? For example, some sort of an arc where we could say, look, here's the promise of this experience, whether this is a 2-year master's degree program or a 6-month program or a 3-day boot camp. I'm going to say, here's the promise. This is what I want you to experience, the transformation. Part of that might be one-on-one lessons with me. Part of it might be group playing. Part of it might be mock auditions or performances or whatever, but make it part of instead of the only. Because if you think about it, think about the best teacher you had. You had an hour lesson with them once a week, right? That teacher was dedicated to your development, dedicated to you as a person. They cared about you. And I guarantee they were thinking about you and working on your things more than just that 60 minutes that you were together. So if you're already doing that extra work anyway, why don't we bake it into the arc of the experience and like beef it up, make it even more accessible. Here's an example of what that looks like. You can study with someone at a college for 2 years to be an orchestral trumpet player, okay? And you can learn excerpts and you can learn how to take auditions. Or you could do the same exact thing with someone in an online space and have access to live mock auditions with a committee drawn from people all over the world. And how about this? What if while you were playing, in the chat right next to you, the comments were being written live in real time, reacting on what you just did? If you did something great, the committee writes their comments. If you crush that trip a little bit or compress that octave, they're writing those comments in real time. And you can go back and watch that recording of yourself playing, getting real-time comments. That's something that doesn't exist in a real audition. You can only do that in an online space. So that's just like one example of how we have possibilities to make this even better. And I know a lot of people are wringing their hands and they hate the screens and the audio quality on Zoom is a topic of conversation. I get it. I'm not dismissing any of that. What I am saying is it's possible for us to move past this into something better instead of letting it all fall apart.
Yeah, and the pace of acceleration in the technology is quite incredible in all sorts of spaces. I was chatting with Michael Desson, who's a professor at UC Irvine recently, who's worked on a piece of software called Jack Trip, or is associated with it, and allows for essentially real-time playing, audio playing over the internet. And that they've 10x or 20x the pace of development on that. I've been chatting with a grad student at Stanford who's in the music department there, and talking about all these VR and AR developments. And I can't wait until I can put on a sleeve, and your colleague David Allen Moore, I can feel what it's like to bow his bow. So like yes, it's frustrating to the sound of a double bass through an iPhone pinhole mic is something that I wouldn't wish on anybody, and I've had my fair share of it the last few months. But it's the ability to connect with people and not have space be the issue. To have those kind of virtual audition panels, or made up of some of the best players in the world, and that sort of communication. It's really exciting. It's cool. Well, I can't wait for the podcast. I will link up to it. Obviously, I'm subscribed. Folks listening should subscribe. Anything else you want to get out to the people out there?
Yeah, I would just say anything you want to find out about Honesty Pill, which, by the way, I should explain what the brand is. I never mentioned that, but it's kind of a weird name. It's basically the fact that people who are desperate to succeed, creative people who really want to get there, are often not willing to swallow the one or two things that they really need to work on. And that's, facing those issues. And I kind of call that approach to learning swallowing the honesty pill. So that's kind of where it comes from. If you want to learn more about it, honestypill.com. There's some great resources there. And I have a Facebook group that's open to all musicians of all levels, where there's some great conversation there. It's not a trumpet thing. It's not a professional music thing. It's just a community of like-minded music. So you can go check that out.
Check the description for links to Chris's podcast, or just search for it wherever you listen to this podcast. And be sure to visit honestypill.com. Follow Chris on social media, and it's just really cool what he's up to.